and it's not a metaphor, it's actually science. That the tongue physically has the power to create or to destroy. As a matter of fact, they were doing some research many years ago. A French scientist named Fabien Mammon in the 1970s was studying some cancer cells and how sound affected cancer cells. And so he put uterine cancer cells on a slide and began to play instruments over them. And he saw that different sounds would cause the cells to vibrate. But then he was looking for the most powerful instrument, and then they used the human voice. And when the human voice sang a 9-note scale, the cancer cells totally disrupted and exploded. And so they actually had ladies begin to sing this 9-note scale for 20 minutes a day, and everyone who did it, their cancer just totally disappeared and dried up. We wonder why when Saul was sick that they called a musician to come in and to play. It's because they understood the power of a sound. When it says the power of life and death is in your tongue, and those who love it, like those who get it, those who understand it, will eat the fruit of it. And you guys, as prophets, you've got to understand the power of life and death that is in your tongue so that you can eat the fruit of what God has given you. Proverbs 18:20, from the fruit of a man's mouth, his stomach will be filled, and with the harvest from his lips he will be satisfied. Proverbs 12:14, from the fruit of his lips a man is filled with good things, as surely as the work of his hands will reward him. James chapter 3, verses 2 through 6, it says, we all stumble in many ways, but if someone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, and he's able to keep his whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal around. Or take ships as an example. Although they're so large and they're driven by such strong winds, they're steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. It has great effect. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by just a small spark. The tongue also is a fire. It's a world of evil among parts. It corrupts the whole person and sets the whole course of his life on fire. And here's the deal. It's basically saying that your tongue will determine your direction and your destiny. And here it's speaking about the negative, the destructive power of the tongue. But we know in the same way that Jesus spoke the word and healed people. That there's something in the spoken word that has power. And you just saw a video of words and sounds shaping physical matter. Taking inanimate matter and it being shaped by a sound, by a frequency. And then you saw it work with fire. And then you saw it work with water. And knowing that your body is made out of silica as well. And that your body is also 60 to 80% water. Wow. This is why Ephesians 4:29 says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. Don't let any negative, energized words come out of your mouth. That's what it means. Negative, energized words come out of your mouth. But only that which is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So there's 3 scientific principles I want to take you through really, really quickly to understand this a little bit better. The first one is the word frequency. It's a word we throw around a lot, but many people don't know exactly what it means. It's just this. Frequency is the measurement of the speed at which matter vibrates. It's the measurement of the speed at which matter vibrates. Everything in the universe is vibrating. I believe that that vibration is the sound of Jesus' voice. That's why heaven and earth will pass away, but his word will never pass away, because his word, his spoken word, is the center of all matter. You see what I'm saying? Do you realize that this is also why it's impossible for God to lie? I used to think that it was only impossible for God to lie because of his morality and his holiness. That God's too pure, too true, too righteous to ever lie. And that if he ever lied, the whole world would probably explode. But that is true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is this: that when God speaks something, all of creation scrambles to take on the shape of what he just said. So even if it wasn't true a millisecond ago, the second God speaks it, all of creation is vibrating and scrambling to take on the shape of what he just said. So it's scientifically impossible for God to lie. Once God speaks, everything in the universe that was created with the sound of his voice still responds to the sound of his voice.
That's good.
All matter in the universe is in a continuous state of vibratory motion. Everything is vibrating. And frequency is just the measurement of the speed at which matter vibrates. Let's go to the second one. It's a little bit harder to understand, but stick with me because this one is actually the key to the realm of the impossible. All right, the scientific word is the word entrainment. Entrainment. Actually, we'll do one more before this. I'm going to change the order real quick. The second word we're going to do is resonance. All right, resonance. And resonance just means to resound. It's the excitation of a sound wave or the intensification of a sound wave so that it can be heard or detected. See, this stand right here is making a sound right now, but we can't hear it because its sound wave is too small. But if I strike it, I intensify the sound wave so that it can be heard. And it's making the same sound every time. That sound is the frequency of its vibration. That sound would be a specific shape on the plate of sand. That sound would create a shape. Not only that, colors are actually just sounds 41 octaves higher on the Hertzian scale of visible light. So every sound is a color and every sound is a shape. And when you make a sound, things are shapes, things are created, things are formed. Okay, so resonance means the intensification or the prolongation of a sound wave so that it can be heard or detected. It's the sound, it's to resound. It's the sound that a vibration makes. Number one, everything in the universe vibrates. Number two, every vibration makes a sound. Every vibration makes a sound. The third thing is this. It's the word entrainment, and the word entrainment is, again, it's a little bit difficult to understand, but it is this. I'm going to give the scientific definition first, and then I'm just going to make it really practical, okay? It's the tendency of two oscillating bodies of the same frequency to lock into phase so that they vibrate together. Isn't that helpful? The tendency of two oscillating frequencies of the same phase to lock together and to vibrate together. What does it mean? It means that when two things have the same vibration, they will move together. Wow. Now let me explain how this was discovered. It was discovered in the 1700s by a Dutch scientist named Christian Huygens. And what happened is he had two identical pendulum clocks on the wall. And these pendulum clocks, when he walked by them, he noticed that the pendulums were swinging in perfect sync together. And so he knocked the pendulums out of phase so they started moving like this, and he went to do some other work. He came back 20 minutes later, and the pendulums were swinging perfectly together again. And so this time he knocked them out of phase again, but he stayed and he watched as the vibrations began to lock into phase with one another until they were swinging perfectly together. I want to show you this in a demonstration with metronomes. Can we play the 3 metronomes, please? So notice how these 3 metronomes are moving together, but if we take one out, the other 2 are not close enough to each other for the sound waves to hit each other, and so they start moving on their own. But if we put the middle metronome back in, see, they're out of phase, but because they have the same vibration, they start locking into phase so they vibrate together again.
That's amazing.
That's the principle of entrainment. That's the principle of entrainment, the tendency of two oscillating bodies to lock into phase. That two sounds that have the same frequency have great power to affect one another. Okay, this is the principle that's used in the breaking of a wine glass with a human voice. Okay, if you were to take if this were a wine glass and I were to ting the side, boom, all right, and I get the pitch, that pitch will actually tell me how quickly this is vibrating. So if this was an A note, and I heard that A note, boom, then I would know that this is vibrating 440 times a second. It's vibrating 440 times a second. All I would have to do is aim my voice at this glass between 90 and 110 decibels. And if I aimed my voice at this glass, the glass would start vibrating along until it couldn't keep up anymore, and then it would explode. That's how someone can break a glass with the human voice. Well, what happens when you put that on a huge level? Well, they found that out in 1941, very near here at the Tacoma Narrows Pass with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It was the fourth longest suspension bridge in the world. And a suspension bridge, the thing about it is it hangs from cables. And as a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind would blow through there, it would rattle those cables. Now that's not a problem, except that the cables were at the same frequency as the bridge itself. And so, you know how we shot fire, we shot sound into the fire, and the fire was shaped like this? And we shot sound into the sand, it took on shape. We shot sound into the water, and it took on a shape. Well, watch what happens when you shoot sound waves into, and these are ultrasonic sound waves. They're so low that you can't hear them, but they can be detected within the concrete and the steel. And watch what happens. Tacoma Narrows Bridge. So there's nothing wrong with the bridge. It stood for many days, and then a breeze began to blow through. That's concrete and steel. And notice that it's making the same kind of wave that we saw in the fire in the Rubens tube. How many know that concrete doesn't bend? Neither does glass, but if you look at the glass under a high-speed camera, when you put your voice through it, that glass will flex back and forth about 4 millimeters or a quarter of an inch. Well, this went on for a couple weeks until the vibrations couldn't keep up anymore. And so the bridge kept taking on the shape of the sound wave of these rattling cables until it couldn't stand anymore. This was not a huge wind. It was not a gale force. It was not an earthquake. But look how much movement is happening. Now you see that man walking. It's rumored that that man is the engineer of the bridge. And that the cars on the bridge, he pulled his car onto the bridge to try to change the pitch or the density of the bridge, but it wasn't enough to change because it wasn't big enough. So he's walking back, he's having a bad day, and it's double back because he looks like Hitler in the 40s. So as I said, this went on for a few weeks until it couldn't keep up anymore, and then it began to break down. There you go, that's the power of entrainment. When two things make the same sound, they will vibrate together. and actually acoustic engineering was born. From that time on, they began to build bridges and buildings analyzing their dominant frequency and making sure that nothing was making the same sound as that building or as that bridge. It's a principle of acoustic engineering. Now, there's other factors, but resonance was a huge part of what was happening, resonance and entrainment in that situation. But you know what it reminds me of? Is one of the ways that entrainment was discovered also later on in 1861 was a bridge in England. And as the army began to walk across this suspension bridge, once again, the bridge began to resonate under the feet of the army, and it vibrated and then fell into the ravine. And so ever since that time, when an army crosses a bridge, they will go into break time or break step. In other words, they won't march at the same time. Because if they march at the same time, it could be the vibration of the bridge, and it might be too much for it to stand. Well, that reminds me of Judges chapter 6. The fall of Jericho. What happened? What happened? God said, for 6 days, you walk around the city without making a sound. Now, what happens when people march together? They come into entrainment with one another. They're marching in perfect time. Their hearts begin to beat together. Their breathing begins to breathe together. They actually come into unity with one another. And the only sound they can make is the sound of obedience. Wow. No complaining, no words of fear, no words of unbelief. They have to be silent while they march around. On the seventh day, they march around 6 times, and on the 7th time, they blow the trumpets and lift up a great shout, and it said, the walls fell down flat, so that every man could walk straight over. We know that a sound wave could do that. Entrainment is the key to the realm of the impossible. The scripture says the power of life and death is in your tongue. Science tells us that the human voice is one of the most powerful instruments on earth. That cancer scientist, every instrument he tried, the most powerful instrument was the human voice. Wow. Why? When God created us in his image, he gave us that power of speech to shape and to form what is around us, because God created all things through the power of his voice and through the power of his word. Now here's the beautiful thing, spiritual entrainment. Let's talk about spiritual entrainment for a moment. Matthew 18:19 says this, again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask for, it shall be done for them by my Father which is in heaven. What is the word agree? It's the word symphoneo, where we get our word symphony. It means to sound together, to be in one accord, to harmonize like the sound of a musical instrument. If 2 people harmonize together, if 2 people come into entrainment, they can ask anything they will, and it will be done for them by my Father who is in heaven. More entrainment, John 15:7 says this, if you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you can ask whatever you will, and it shall be done for you. This is why I say entrainment is the law of the impossible. It releases the impossible realm. Why? Because if you abide, that means if you're resonating on God's frequency, and his word is resonating inside of you, when you speak, creation will respond to the voice that created it, even if it's coming through you. Creation, everything in the universe will respond to the sound that created it. It is the dominant frequency in the universe. So if I'm resonating on the frequency of God's heart and his word is resonating in me, I am in entrainment with heaven. When I make the sound God is making, all the universe will scramble to take on the shape of whatever I'm speaking. The power of a prophetic declaration is to come into entrainment with heaven. It's to resonate with the heart of the Father. It's to let the Word of God, what He is speaking and what He has said in His Word, to vibrate in every fiber of your being. Then when you speak the Word of the Lord, creation thinks it's His voice. And so nothing will be impossible for you. The power of life and death that's in the tongue is not poetry, and it's not a metaphor. It is science. It is science. It is absolute fact. It is provable that sound impacts inanimate matter and causes it to take on shape. In the same way, by faith, we understand that God spoke everything in the universe from nothing. He created it. And science tells us that everything that is needed for matter to exist happened in the first 3 verses of Genesis through Father, Holy Spirit, and Son. God spoke it into existence, and now He said, this power of life and death is in your tongue. We said earlier that there's 2 types of prophecy. There is foretelling and there is forthtelling. Foretelling is how does Chris say it? I have it written down here. It's to know the future. And forthtelling is to cause the future. Foretelling is that place where in Isaiah chapter 42 it says the former things have come to pass and new things I'm getting ready to do. But before they spring forth in the earth, I look for somebody I can tell so that they can make the new sound.
Wow.
So that they can make the new song.
Wow.
What is that? It's coming into entrainment with heaven. Before something new springs forth in the earth, I'm looking for someone who can make the sound of the new thing.
Wow.
What if the new thing is not waiting on heaven, it's waiting on you? What if the new thing is not waiting for God to do something, but for you to make the sound that heaven is making? I have one more example, and then we're going to wrap this up in just a moment. But several years ago, and again, this was kind of during the Toronto season, but I was playing on a worship team, and we had a speaker from the Toronto Blessing come down, and he was talking about a river of fire. Now, as a worship team, what we try to do is when someone spoke on a subject, in the music afterwards, as sons of Asaph, as the tribe of Asaph, we try to sing what they were just saying. And so we'd sing a song either that was already crafted that matched what they said, or we'd write a song in the moment that matched what they were saying. So we were singing about a river of fire, and we began to sing Send the Fire. As we began to sing Send the Fire, God started answering from heaven with a sound. It was like, sounded kind of like voices, sounded kind of like music, sounded kind of like wind. It was really hard to describe, but it was so loud, we all stopped. And I thought it was the keyboard player. I said, is that you? And he's like, that's not me. I said, sing it again, sing Send the Fire. And he sang it, and the sound came, and it came 14 times in response to our voice. And so when it was over, we were so impacted by it, we ran back to the soundboard. We said, did you get that recorded? And they said, oh no, we turned it off after the preaching. We ran to the video camera. Oh, did you get that? It was VHS back then. Did you get that recorded? He said, oh no, I turned it off after the preaching. But when we looked at the camera, it was kind of down on its side, but the red light was on, and it came on right before the phenomena started all by itself. So I actually have the footage from this event. Now I'm off camera in this picture, but you can hear my voice. I'm shouting at the guy. I was playing guitar. And so I'm going to show you this footage because it's an example of entrainment. When we make the sound that God is making, then it opens heaven and it shapes the earth. Let's look at the footage here. It's way out of focus and it's a little shaky because it was on its side, and it's also VHS. But let's go ahead and turn that sound up a little bit. Okay, here's the first time right here. Hear that sound right there? Now see how he turned his head? I said, is that you? Did you play that on the keyboard? fire.
Set the fire.
And the sound comes right back. Now, at first, only he and I heard it. He goes, did you hear that?
The wind of the Spirit.
The guys on the other side of the stage haven't heard it yet. But it was so loud that it picked up on the camera in the back of the room. Okay, now the guy in the comments just heard it.
Set the fire. Set the fire.
I took off my guitar, the guy took off his bass. I was laying on the floor. I was overwhelmed by what was going
Set
on.
the fire.
Now he's going to make a tactical error. He's going to start singing, I hear the sound of pouring rain. And the sound totally stops. And so I jumped off the floor and I screamed, man, you're raining on the fire. Go back to the fire. All right, here we go, watch. Notice how the sound is responding to his voice.
I hear the sound of pouring rain.
Nothing.
I hear the sound of pouring rain.
No, you don't. I'm like, go back to the fire.
I hear the sound
Now watch.
of pouring rain. Set the fire.
And it comes right back again. I'm like, stay with the fire, man. Stay with the fire.
Set the fire. Set the fire.
Now watch, as he intensifies, the sound's going to intensify. It's going to come louder and it's going to come more often. There's the sound. There it is again. There it is again. It's matching the level of his passion.
Set the fire.
Come on, give the Lord praise. Blessings of the Son from heaven. Okay, anybody tired of doing rain when God's doing fire?